What just happened with Story Protocol? It's absolutely exploded in the past 24 hours. And so we're going to try and figure out why and discuss some of the things that happened to get it here and what we could potentially see next out of Story Protocol. So stay tuned. We're going to go through all of it today. First off, though, I did want to show you just kind of the magnitude of what we're seeing coming from showing us the crypto bubbles. We can see World Token doing well, Mix doing quite well, but IP 28% just in one day. This is very impressive in an otherwise like almost red market, right? I mean, we can see the majority of the market by terms of pure numbers is looking red, but we are seeing a couple massive green tokens here that are kind of propping the market up overall. And so we can see here IP being the second largest one behind Mix. And then if we look at the weekly, almost 40% here on IP, and then Mix just absolutely exploding out of nowhere. This is a very unusual to see this type of thing happening. We can see Mix Finance just absolutely going parabolic. So we can talk about that one potentially in a future video. But of course, the video today is Story Protocol, and as you can see, this one not going parabolic, this one just essentially teleporting straight up. We haven't really even seen that kind of J curve. It just immediately jumps. And so we're going to be talking about that and why it's happened and all of that type of good stuff. You can see here we have the IP story, or the Story Protocol US dollar chart here, and you can see here this is the daily. I'm actually going to bring it back into probably the hourly just so we can kind of see a better idea of kind of what exactly has happened. Now you can see here kind of a similar extreme pump over about end of August, so probably about 2.5 weeks ago at this point. We could see just a massive pump coming out of nowhere, and then we kind of see, you know, kind of putters along a little bit, and then we see another, again, massive move out here with a just crazy move up with a ton of buy pressure coming in, an insane move to the upside on price, and then we could see coming right back in, at least in the Bollinger Bands on the hourly, but we are still massively overbought on the hourly as well. So potentially a little bit of some retracement coming. We'll have to see. If we do take a look at it on the daily, though, you can see very, very clearly still outside of the Bollinger Bands here, as well as the RSI being overbought as well. So again, this is potentially a time in which, you know, we might be seeing a little bit of retracement. Usually when we've seen this type of move, particularly on a move that is as kind of news driven as this, it's sometimes a little bit scary to go in short on a move like this, just because sometimes it can continue to get propelled higher because of the pure narrative play that is going on here. So I'm not saying that we should be, you know, kind of immediately jumping in short, but generally I would say this is probably not the best time to be jumping in long. Again, this is just my opinion. You of course can do whatever you want, and you should do whatever you want as long as you have done your own research. So, but what we can see here, we, you know, kind of a very steady move to the upside, which is kind of interesting. And then we see a little bit of a dip, and then again, kind of these two just giga candles coming out of nowhere here, looking kind of very similar. So potentially we see this continue to grind up. You know, it just really depends. It does look though like Story Protocol is catching some movement going into the back half of this year, which is good because I have looked into Story Protocol. They were at ETH Denver back in like kind of the February, March timeframe. I thought what they were doing was very cool. You know, I think it still is cool, but a lot of what we are seeing here, I think, is just purely narrative driven. You can see kind of largely coming off of this story. I'm assuming there's no like kind of definitive answer, as we kind of generally say in the crypto space, narrative does follow price. And so we're trying to look for something that explains this move in price. If I had to guess, it's probably this announcement that IP Strategy is essentially the first publicly listed treasury vehicle centered on Story Protocol's IP token. Now, this is actually kind of nuts when you think about it on its face, because Story Protocol is like, it's a large token, right? But it's not like one of the big ones, right? And we're seeing things like Bitcoin treasuries and Ethereum treasuries and things like that. But we're not seeing things like ADA treasuries, and, you know, maybe we have, but they're just not very well publicized. So, you know, the fact that we're seeing something like an IP Strategy treasury company is actually pretty insane. And so to me, I think this is largely what's driving the move in price. We're also seeing some claims that, you know, potentially we're seeing some whale activity, and whale activity is trying to kind of, you know, coax retail into buying, things like that. quite possibly, it's all obviously almost impossible to say for sure, but it wouldn't necessarily surprise me based off of kind of using this type of story to kind of boost price and see price going. But you can already see, we're selling off a little bit. Even if we were to go back down into like 30-minute candles, you'll see that we had this really nice move, and now this is kind of the retrace that's coming. You could see right now the $10.70 range kind of seems to be a fairly decent level of support. If we do break through that level of support, I do think it's entirely possible that we find ourselves back here at about the $10.12, and then from there maybe about $9.65, and then from there it's probably looking like we maybe even make it all the way back down to like the high $8 range. So again, I do think that there is potentially some selling pressure to come just after such an insane move to the upside for Story Protocol. Though again, when you see moves based on kind of these narrative plays, it's sometimes a dangerous proposition to be going short on something, because it can kind of go, it can continue longer than what you might initially think. And so that's why I'm just kind of sitting tight right now, not doing anything too crazy, even though I was quite inclined to take a short up in this range, which turns out probably would have been a decent play at this point. But again, there is a difference between trading and gambling, right? So you just need to make sure that you understand kind of the nuance there and make sure that you're kind of trading accordingly. Again, this is me not offering recommendations to buy or sell. This is just my thoughts on things, and you, of course, can kind of make your own decisions from there. Now, the other thing that I really wanted to focus on as we start to transition into like what could come next for Story Protocol, what could come next for IP, the token, all of this type of stuff, because we have seen a major move, and we want to see if it's substantiated, because a lot of times things in crypto move and we don't necessarily see the fundamentals to back it up. And so I just want to talk about that a little bit. Before we do go into that though, of course, I am always trading. If you are looking to follow along or maybe trade yourself, as you can see, we have been talking about the Story Protocol moves here. I also do have that XRP trade open, up about 27%, down a little bit from where we were yesterday, but I'm actually going to be making an XRP video discussing what we're seeing right now. I think that this is all going according to plan. So I'm very interested to kind of see what happens over the next couple of days, and hopefully you are too. Feel free to check that out when it does come out. Probably later today is when it'll be coming out. But going back to Story Protocol, we want to make sure that this type of stuff is kind of fundamentally sound and has backing to validate it. Well, if you look, on the story, or on the kind of face of it, the story here is absolutely nuts, right? Protocol's revenue up nearly 48x in just 10 days. Yeah, that's great, right? I mean, they had chain fees of $15 in 24 hours, basically nothing. TVL of about $33 million. Again, quite small compared to some of these other larger chains. DEX volume, very small. Total raise, all this type of stuff, not looking super great. Well, now you can see the 48x increase is to $731, which of course, that is a 48x increase. But when you're talking about other chains generating millions of dollars a day, there is still thousands of X's needed to happen here for this to be like actually a viable chain so far. Now, of course, the trend is right, but seeing with numbers this small, having a quick blip up to $700 and down is like not hard to do at all. Like I personally could probably do that myself, right? And so this is something where with these small numbers, you have to be very careful that you don't get sucked in to these kind of fake out moves if whales are trying to trap in, trap in retail or anything like that. And if we do look here on DeFi LIama, you can see that this is true. There is $731, and there are about $41 million of TVL locked on the Story Protocol. So definitely still some good stuff here, but you have to imagine if we were to value this, and now I understand crypto is not necessarily totally like a public company, right? But if you were to value this like a public company, we are seeing a fully diluted market cap of $11 billion off of revenue of $700 a day, right? Let's annualize that revenue. Let's actually just go and pull up the calculator, the old trusty calculator, 731 times 365. That is $266,000 a year in revenue, right? Okay, well, if we do $11 billion, I'm just gonna round it evenly, and we do $11 billion divided by 266, I'll even just say 267, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, we'll round up. We're at a 41,000 price to earnings ratio. And again, this isn't even right. This is price to revenue ratio, because earnings almost certainly are negative. And so a price to revenue ratio of 41,198 is absolutely nuts, right? So from a pure like financial or like a fundamental perspective here, a 28% move off of a 48x seems possibly reasonable, right? But when the 48x is going from $15 to 700, I don't necessarily consider that quite the same. Now, however, crypto is very, very forward looking, possibly even more than most markets, and it's very, very risk on and risk adept. So I think seeing this type of move, there is a large contingent of people as well as whales and market makers that are trying to flush liquidity and liquidate some easy leverage plays. But there is a lot of people who are probably thinking, oh, well, if it was 48x in these 10 days, well, maybe we 48x in the next 10 days, and then we 48x the next 10 days after that, and we 48x the next 10 days after that. And then all of a sudden, Story Protocol is doing millions of dollars a day in revenue. And then all of a sudden, it's this great, huge, amazing protocol, and the price goes like $1,000 a token or whatever. Yes, that is maybe potentially possible in some version of the world, but it's most certainly not the most likely outcome. And so this is what I just I like to chill, settle down a little bit. I do think, and you can even see, this is why I think that the charts, using these technical indicators that we talk about all of the time on the channel, using the technical indicators here of showing, particularly on the daily, what's going on, it's very, very likely that this is overextended to some degree. If this momentum is going to continue to the upside, we should see something similar to this, right? I mean, now of course, if the candle closes right here, and let's just take this as a next, as a next step, we can see that even if we wait for this to come back into the Bollinger Bands, it's very likely we're going to be buying at an equivalent or potentially even lower price than where we're at right now. Now again, if you bought it here, maybe you're buying it a little higher, but relatively the risk is much, much lower, right? So that to me is the very important piece to understand here, and why I personally am not looking to kind of ape in all of my money into this play, because it's really looking overextended right now. We can see, this is not me saying that we cannot continue to see a move to the upside. We can still continue to see a move to the upside, but generally if it's going to have any level of sustained move, it's going to do this over the course of several days, right? We're going to see this kind of calm down, even if it doesn't do anything except trade sideways, which we kind of saw it do here. We saw it trade sideways to up, but it did the velocity and the volume at which it went up slowed down dramatically, right? And so we could possibly see it do a similar type of thing. Let's wait for some of the fundamentals to correct a little bit. We'll track how their revenue trends. All of this type of stuff we can track, and then maybe make a little bit more of a reasonable entry. Right now, a lot of the buys and sells going on right now. Well, I guess I shouldn't say sells. Selling is probably a great time, particularly if you're down in here. You're up a quick, 2x in the span of like 14 days or something like that. So, if you are kind of in or playing in this type of move, any of the buys coming in at this point, in my mind, are purely kind of like FOMO buys, because for whatever reason, somebody's convinced you that this is going to go to $100 in the next 2 weeks. It might, but probably not, right? I mean, we're just not in that point of the season yet, at least in my opinion. Again, I could be massively wrong, and you can all come back from the future and tell me how wrong I was. But just generally speaking, probably 98 to 99 times out of 100, I won't be. So that's kind of why I'm taking the stance that I am. Of course, I do really, really like Story Protocol. I think it's really awesome. But generally, the whole point of crypto is to not be top blasting these types of projects. If you did like it, you're probably in already. So that's one of the things I would say. Try to stay away from these fear, FOMO, hype-based moves, and just make sure that you're understanding it. Generally, what I normally do, and honestly, this is something that has really helped me out over the past probably 3 to 4 years, basically ever since 2021, because I fell prey to some of these types of moves. Generally, what I will do is if I see something like Story Protocol making this type of move, I'll say, okay, got it locked in the head. Story Protocol is maybe something that I should look at, and I will add it to a list where I essentially just check up on it maybe every week, maybe every 2 weeks, and I see what price does. I can't kind of keep up with what's going on with the project itself. Are they doing new cool things? What are they even doing? How's their revenue trending? All of this type of stuff. And then I also see what happens to price. And if we see something happen to price, like what we saw back here in kind of the June timeframe, where we see maybe potentially an overextension to the downside, then you could say, okay, Story Protocol is cool. I'm going to get in. and then you can write it up. If you would have gotten here in June, you're probably looking at about a 4x right now on Story Protocol. You can see here, February to March, we saw that same write up. I'm sure these were the same FOMO buyers who were like, oh my gosh, it's going to $100 a coin immediately. And then what did it do? End back down here at $2.50 a coin, where you could have just bought in if you were patient. So this, to me, is the key to crypto. This is like, if you learn one thing from crypto, it's that basically all the charts are going to have some version of this type of happen. Pump, really come back down pretty low. If you're paying attention, you can get in here and then see a similar, potentially even higher pump. Story Protocol is a good project. I do think that we see much, much higher than $11 later on into this bull run. But that also doesn't mean we see lower than $11 at some point between now and when we see higher than $11, right? So that's just kind of my opinion here. Again, hopefully you found the information in this video useful, and it gives you a good kind of understanding of how some of these kind of pumps work, maybe helping you kind of quell your FOMO a little bit is kind of really my hope. But overall, yeah, if you have any comments, questions, anything like that, just drop those in the comment section. I do still maintain that Story Protocol is very cool. So, while I wouldn't personally be getting in right now, I would definitely be adding it to my list as I have months ago and be looking to kind of, maybe look for a more optimal entry. So overall, if you did find the information useful, helpful, like, subscribe, all that type of stuff, hit that notification bell. You all know what to do. It does really, really help me out, continue to grow the channel. I am always continuing to try and make better content and all that type of stuff. And so also your feedback does really help me out as well. So anything that you have for me would be really helpful. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.